Today, we're diving deep into the fascinating world of ancient Egypt. But we're not focusing on pharaohs and pyramids this time. Today, we're asking, what was life really like for slaves in this ancient civilization? Slavery was a fact of life in ancient Egypt, just like in many other parts of the ancient world. But unlike the brutal slavery of the Americas, where slaves were seen as mere property, things were a bit more complex in ancient Egypt. There were two main categories of slaves in Egypt. The first were prisoners of war, or people purchased from traders, often from conquered lands like Nubia or Canaan. These slaves were seen as foreign property, but not necessarily subhuman. The second category was Egyptians who fell into debt and were forced into servitude to pay it off. This was a kind of temporary slavery, with the possibility of eventually buying their freedom. Life for a slave could be harsh. Owners were obligated to provide food and basic shelter, but working conditions could be brutal, especially in dusty quarries or suffocating mines. Punishment for disobedience would usually also be severe. However, recent studies suggest it wasn't always a life of complete misery. Unlike some other slave societies, there's evidence that slaves in Egypt weren't a completely separate social class. They could own some property, even marry free Egyptians. Some, like mai-per-heri, a Nubian who rose to a high position in the court of Hatshepsut, even achieved remarkable social mobility. In their precious free time, slaves toiled by flickering firelight, mending tattered clothes and nurturing small gardens to supplement their meager rations. Sleep was a precious commodity, snatched from the few free hours they possessed. Family bonds existed under a constant threat. Children could be ripped away at the whim of a master, leaving parents to grapple with agonizing separations. Marriages also held no legal weight, vulnerable to being broken by a single decision. Yet despite the hardships, a powerful sense of community often blossomed among the enslaved. Music and storytelling were important aspects of Egyptian culture, and slaves likely used them for entertainment and cultural expression. A slave's life could vary greatly depending on their owner and skill set. Some worked in the harsh sun, hauling massive stones for pharaohs' monuments or working on vast temple estates. But contrary to the popular belief, slaves did not build the pyramids. It was actually willing participants who wanted to help create resting places for the pharaohs. These jobs were grueling and dangerous, though. But not all slaves were destined for backbreaking labor. While male slaves often worked in heavy labor, women faced a different reality. Wealthy households might have had female slaves who served as personal attendants, musicians, or even dancers. Some women with specific skills could become weavers, brewers, or even midwives. There's also evidence of female slaves being taken as concubines by their owners. This could be a harsh reality, but in some cases, it offered a chance for a woman to gain influence within the household. The children born from these relationships held a complex status, considered partially free and sometimes even inheriting property. The fate of children born to slaves was tied to their parents' status. They were automatically considered slaves, but there's limited evidence suggesting some level of protection, especially for very young children. Light domestic work or assisting their parents in their skilled crafts might be their reality as they grew older. Egyptian religion, with its emphasis on Maid, the goddess of harmony, in the afterlife, offered a surprising solace to slaves. While their daily lives were restricted, slaves were not excluded from the spiritual world. They could still find comfort in familiar deities. Popular gods like Osiris, the god of the underworld and rebirth, and Isis, the goddess of protection and motherhood, were accessible to everyone, regardless of social status. Slaves could pray to these deities for strength, protection, and a better fate in the afterlife. One of the most comforting aspects of Egyptian religion for slaves was the belief in a shared afterlife. Unlike some societies where social status continued after death, Egyptians believed everyone had the potential to reach a blissful afterlife. Central to this belief was the concept of the weighing of the heart. After death, a person's heart was weighed against the feather of Maat. If the heart was lighter, symbolizing a life lived according to Maat, the deceased would enter a paradise filled with abundance and joy. This belief system offered hope to slaves. Despite their earthly hardships, they could strive to live a good and just life, ensuring a happy eternity. While religious beliefs likely helped slaves find meaning in their daily tasks, transforming their labor into a contribution to the divine order of the universe, achieving freedom remained a difficult feat in ancient Egypt. There were only a few paths to achieving the coveted status of freedman. Devotion and hard work could pay off for a slave. Loyal service over many years, perhaps even saving a master's life, could lead to a grateful owner granting manumission as a reward. Imagine a skilled builder who consistently impressed the pharaoh with their work. Their talent could become their ticket to freedom. Egyptians believed in a rich afterlife, and some owners freed slaves to ensure their own well-being in the next world. A slave who cared for their master diligently might be manumitted as a way to guarantee continued service in the afterlife. Archaeological discoveries provide a glimpse into the realities of manumission. Papyrus documents detail legal transactions where slaves were freed. These documents offer insights into the reasons for manumission, the price a slave might pay for their freedom, and even the ceremonies involved. One such papyrus tells the story of Inanna, a slave woman who purchased her own freedom and that of her children. This story highlights the determination and resourcefulness some slaves possessed to achieve their liberty. Even after gaining freedom, former slaves faced challenges. They might struggle to find work or housing, and social integration could be difficult. However, manumission offered a chance to build a new life. And for some, it was the culmination of years of hard work, hope, and maybe even a little luck. While slavery existed across many civilizations in the ancient world, the Egyptian system had some distinct characteristics. Let's take a quick tour and see how it stacked up against its contemporaries. In Mesopotamia, slavery shared some similarities with Egypt. Both civilizations relied heavily on prisoners of war and debt bondage to acquire slaves. Additionally, skilled slaves in both societies could hold positions as artisans or scribes. However, key differences separated the two systems. Mesopotamian slavery was generally harsher, with crueler punishments and a much lower chance for enslaved people to improve their social standing. Unlike Egypt, where slaves had some rights and could even own property, Mesopotamian slaves were viewed as pure property with fewer legal protections. In Greece, conquering populations and debt bondage were also sources of slaves. Additionally, skilled slaves in Greece could gain a level of respect and even buy their freedom. However, Greek slavery leaned more heavily towards chattel slavery, meaning slaves were seen purely as property with fewer legal rights. Their work was often concentrated in domestic labor, unlike Egypt's broader range of tasks. Furthermore, Greece's particularly brutal warfare resulted in a much larger pool of enslaved people compared to Egypt. So while slavery was definitely a part of ancient Egypt, it seems the reality was more nuanced than a simple black and white picture. The system was complex and individual experiences could vary greatly. There's still much to learn about the lives of slaves in this fascinating civilization. What surprised you the most about slavery in ancient Egypt? Let's keep the conversation going in the comments below. And don't forget to like and subscribe for more videos about our past.